Rain fell hard that night, soaking the narrow streets on the poorer side of town where the only neon lights came from tired corner stores and flickering diner signs. Lila James hurried along the gutter edges, clutching her school bag to her chest like a lifeline. The rain plastered strands of hair against her face and seeped through the stitching of her worn jacket, but she didn't care. She had only one destination in mind, the glittering mansion perched on the hill. Inside that mansion, warmth pulsed from chandeliers, violins sang, and Denver's elite youth laughed over champagne glasses. It was the graduation after-party that everyone whispered about, an invitation-only gathering where wealth measured worth and surnames built futures. Lila wasn't officially invited, of course. Girls like her daughters without fortunes, families without legacies weren't summoned to that world. But she had convinced herself that night would change everything. Because inside was Daniel Cole. Daniel wasn't just the boy every girl noticed. He was the boy Lila noticed every day in class and every night in her dreams. Perfectly styled hair, tailored suits at 18 because he looked the part, and confidence he wore like cologne, thick and irresistible. He barely noticed her at school. She was the girl with second-hand shoes who always sat in the library corner, scribbling goals in spiral notebooks. But she noticed him. She noticed every laugh, every sarcastic remark, every smile that twisted into arrogance. And still her chest tightened each time his name echoed through crowded halls. So when she stepped through the cathedral-tall doorway of that mansion, invited only because she tagged along with a sympathetic friend, her heart beat dangerously. She saw him holding court near the bar, surrounded by girls in diamond chokers and boys who already wore Rolexes gifted at graduation. For 5 minutes she hovered on the sidelines, dripping water onto marble tiles, rehearsing what she would say. She wasn't naive. She knew the gulf between them, a canyon carved by money itself. But she also knew one truth: she was more than the charity cases and scholarship labels. And tonight, if she told him so, maybe Daniel would finally see her. She approached, nerves fluttering and determination locked in her throat. Daniel. Her voice cracked the cocoon of laughter around him. Heads turned. She wished the marble floor would swallow her, but his eyes slid lazily toward her, half amused, half annoyed. Do I know you? His words sliced casually, like a man brushing lint off his sleeve. Her cheeks flushed hot. It's Lila. Lila James. We had literature together all year. One of the girls near him giggled, whispering something too low to hear but too obvious to miss. Yes, Lila continued quickly, feeling the ground slipping. I just wanted to say I admire you. I think you're smart. Confident. I know I probably don't belong here, but I want you to know that one day, I'm going to make something of myself. There, she had said it. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Daniel smirked faintly, tilting his glass. That's sweet. He looked her up and down slowly, the soaked jacket, shoes squeaking against the marble, hair sticking from the rain. He chuckled. Ambition suits you better than those shoes, I'll give you that. Laughter broke out around them, light but heavy, a dagger disguised as silk. Her face burned. And as for your little crush or whatever you're trying to do here, Daniel added, letting his voice rise so the circle leaned closer, you might want to aim for someone in your tax bracket. I don't do charity work in my dating life. The group howled with laughter. Lila's chest hollowed, her throat tightening with tears that she refused to release. Not here, not in front of them. She stood frozen, heart pounding, her dignity unraveling strand by strand. Daniel gave her a final dismissive glance. No hard feelings. You'll land a nice accountant, maybe? Someone who thinks debt is adorable. He raised his glass as though in a toast, basking in the cruel attention. Lila turned before anyone could see her crack open completely. She walked fast, too fast, out the mansion doors, into the storm, into anonymity. Rain swallowed the tears on her cheeks until no one could tell where humiliation ended and downpour began. On the bus ride home, dripping and beaten, she sat stiff and silent. Around her, strangers stared, whispering, pity flickering in their eyes. She clutched her bag tighter with hands that shook, replaying his words like knives. Poor. Beneath him. Nobody. Each word branded her. And yet beneath the ache, a flame sparked in Lila's chest. He thought this was her ending. He thought her name would be forgotten, her ambition ridiculed. But he had given her a gift without realizing it. Tonight, Daniel Cole turned her humiliation into fury and fury into fuel. Lila tilted her face toward the blurred city lights outside the bus window and whispered to herself in defiance, one day I'll build an empire so high you'll choke on the view. Her fists clenched. Her breath steadied. That night didn't break her. It birthed her. Years from now, when the city whispered about a woman who built fortune from nothing, when Daniel found himself staring at the girl he had rejected, now untouchable in her own wealth, he would remember the storm. And he would realize the rain had baptized a rival. The morning after the storm, Lila lay awake in the cramped apartment she shared with her mother. The peeling paint on her ceiling stared back at her like judgmental eyes, reminding her of everything Daniel had said, everything the world already believed about her. Her mother shuffled quietly in the kitchen, humming off-key as coffee brewed weakly on the old kettle. That smell, burnt and bitter, anchored Lila to reality. She sat up, wiped sleep from her eyes and whispered to herself, never again. I'll never let anyone laugh at me like that again. But words came easier than progress. Graduation was over and the safety net of school had disappeared. Lila applied for jobs everywhere: cafes, call centers, retail stores. Again and again she was passed over. Employers either wanted someone with more experience or occasionally treated her like another charity case with pity disguised as courtesy. Bills stacked on the chipped counter. Shoes wore through at the soles. When her mother's chronic back pain flared, hospital bills became another shadow pressing in. The rejection at the mansion was just one in a long line of blows to her dignity. Lila crumbled more than once, muffling her sobs into the pillow so her mother couldn't hear. Still, every night she pulled out her spiral notebook, the one filled with dreams scribbled in messy ink. She added new goals: learn business. Save at least $500 this year. Start something of my own, no matter how small. She doodled a dollar sign in the corner, then underlined it twice. The first opportunity arrived clumsily. A cafe on the east side finally accepted her application. She earned minimum wage making lattes for college kids who carried laptops worth more than her rent. Most customers hardly noticed her unless their order was 5 seconds late. But she noticed everything. The flow of cash over the counter. The number of pastries wasted every day. The way the store promoted seasonal items to push higher profits. She asked questions, sometimes too many. Her boss called her nosy. But secretly Lila wrote everything down, learning. On her lunch breaks, she read free articles on personal finance, watched videos about saving, listened to podcasts about entrepreneurship. She scribbled each idea into her notebook. Every business solves a problem. Waste nothing. Value time. Value people. Still, life was brutally heavy. There were nights she returned home with tips totaling only a few crumpled bills, just enough for rice and groceries. There were mornings she walked to work in the rain with holes in her sneakers, wondering if this grind would ever end. The laughter from that mansion haunted her in the worst moments. Daniel's smirk. The glittering crowd. It became not just pain, it became her fuel. Keep laughing, she thought, dragging herself home after 16-hour shifts. I'll turn your cruelty into my crown. 2 years passed this way. She saved ruthlessly, tucking every spare dollar into a jar hidden beneath floorboards. Birthdays went uncelebrated, new clothes never bought, dinners skipped. Her notebooks thickened with sketches of business models. But starting capital was still a mountain too high. Until one night, opportunity knocked in the form of trash. She noticed a customer leave behind an expensive handbag near the cafe trash bin. But at closer look, it wasn't discarded by accident. It was ruined, its strap ripped completely off. $1,000 for something broken, she murmured, shaking her head. The next day she saw another, a pair of designer shoes left behind at a donation bin, water-stained but otherwise salvageable. That's when she realized, there was gold in what wealthy people threw away. Lila spent her evenings scouring thrift stores, dumpsters behind boutique shops, donation piles. She cleaned shoes, mended torn bags, polished jewelry with cheap kits. Then she listed everything online. At first, sales trickled $20, $30, $50. But soon, buyers noticed her knack for making the unwanted look exquisite. Her small online store, Second Sunrise, slowly browsed itself into a community favorite. By 21, Lila had accumulated $5,000 in profit. It was more money than anyone in her family had ever held at one time. When her mother wept seeing the jars of cash lined up in neat stacks, Lila knelt beside her and whispered, This is just the beginning. I promised, remember? No one will laugh at me again. But laughter wasn't done with her yet. A local networking event for young entrepreneurs advertised free entry. Lila, clutching her pile of flyers, walked nervously into the hall packed with startup dreamers. She displayed her refurbished shoes and handbags proudly. Some attendees smiled politely. Others whispered, smirked, moved on. And then a familiar voice cut through the hum of conversation. Well, if it isn't the thrift store queen. Daniel. Her chest tightened instantly. Daniel Cole stood taller than before, clad in another designer suit, his smirk unchanged. Time had polished his arrogance further. He was accompanied by friends who laughed the moment they recognized her. What's this? Dumpster diving turned business? One asked. Daniel folded his arms. I almost have to admire the audacity. Taking other people's trash and selling it as treasure. It's cute. He leaned down, whispering low enough for her but loud enough for others to hear. But you're still just poor Lila. In this business? It's pocket change. Don't think for a second you belong in this room. His words cut deep, reopening scars she thought had healed. But Lila steadied herself. She remembered vows whispered on buses, notebooks filled with dreams, nights going hungry to save pennies. She straightened her back and replied calmly, I don't just belong in this room. One day I'll own the building it sits in. The room chuckled. Daniel's smirk widened. But in secret, her words planted unease even he couldn't admit. For Lila, the humiliation didn't wound, it renewed her vow. She walked out of the hall that night more certain than ever. She wouldn't just survive. She would thrive. She wouldn't just make enough for herself and her mother. She would build wealth so commanding that no sneer, no mansion full of laughter, could ever touch her spirit again. And Daniel, whether he knew it or not, had just sharpened her resolve further. Every cruel word he spoke became one more brick in the empire she swore she'd rise to build. The night of Daniel's second humiliation haunted Lila less than she expected. Instead of breaking her, it tightened her determination like a coiled spring. She replayed his sneer as she lay on her narrow bed, notebooks spread across her lap. Pocket change, he had said. Good. Then one day she would bury him with the weight of her pocket change. The fuse had been lit. But building a fire required fuel far beyond stubborn pride. Her business, Second Sunrise, started to grow faster than she could manage. Orders doubled week after week. Customers began sending specific requests, asking her to track down certain brands, rare pieces, vintage finds. Lila spent hours each weekend bouncing between consignment stores and rummage shops, hauling bags of what others dismissed as junk. She bleached, stitched, polished, photographed. Her tiny bedroom became a showroom, bed nearly hidden by stacks of labeled boxes. Her mother shook her head with both worry and awe. You work harder than anyone I know. But are you remembering to live, Lila? She's not asking me to live, Lila muttered while scrubbing rust off a buckle. She's asking me to prove myself. At 22, she moved operations into a rented storage unit with cheap shelves and a makeshift desk. It was nothing glamorous, but it was hers. Every piece sold carried a little victory. The small profits multiplied, saved carefully, reinvested ruthlessly. Lila never spent on herself, no new clothes, no restaurant dinners, no vacations. Every dollar was both soldier and seed. But ambition came hand in hand with mistakes. One winter, an order for a rare handbag went disastrously wrong. She had spent $200 restoring it, only for the buyer to complain online about a cheap knockoff. A storm of comments followed: critics, trolls, doubters. For weeks, her inbox filled with cancellations and insults. Sales plummeted by half. Lila sat in the storage unit, surrounded by silent shelves, staring at the glowing red numbers in her online account, a sea of refunds. Her heart clenched. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe I don't belong here. But the stillness allowed a whisper to rise inside. This is part of it. Failure isn't the end. It's the tuition you pay to learn. She forced herself to message every angry buyer personally, apologizing, offering replacements, explaining flaws. Slowly the storm softened. A loyal handful of customers defended her publicly. By spring her sales steadied. The lesson carved deep lines inside her. Trust wasn't optional, it was currency. Instead of hiding the next time, she leaned into honesty. Descriptions on her site became more transparent. Customers appreciated it. Reviews soared again. Her resilience turned crisis into foundation. By 24, Lila earned $25,000 in 1 year. It wasn't millions, but it was validation. She rented a small studio apartment that doubled as her workshop. With peeling brick walls and a drafty window, it wasn't flashy. She painted it herself, leaving brushstrokes uneven, symbols of rebuilding. That year, she also met Mara, a tenacious accountant who became both her first employee and unexpected friend. Mara wore glasses always slipping down her nose, and she spoke blazingly fast about numbers. "You're talented at hustle, Lila," Mara said one late night, crunching spreadsheets. "But hustle burns out. It's time to build system. Scale smart. Stop sewing every torn strap by yourself. Train others. Multiply yourself." Lila blinked. "Multiply myself?" Mara grinned. "If there were 10 Liliths, you'd already own the city. Let's build something close to that." Her confidence gave Lila courage. They designed repeatable processes, detailed cleaning guides, photo templates, shipping standards. They pitched local consignment stores to let Lila handle overflow items in exchange for commission. Business expanded. Still, long hours consumed them. Sleep became a stranger. At one point, Lila fainted mid-restoration session from sheer exhaustion. Mara forced her home with strict orders. "Empires are marathons, not sprints. You kill yourself, you kill the business." The reminder stung. But it sharpened her focus again. Inspired by Mara, Lila began studying more seriously. Nights, she devoured free business courses online. Phrases like margins, marketing funnels, brand identity filled her notebooks. Every free scrap of knowledge became a building block. At 25, she rebranded Second Sunrise into Aurora Exchange. Sleek website, professional photography, custom logo. Suddenly, customers treated her less like a hobbyist and more like a boutique. The aura of legitimacy attracted bigger buyers. Orders poured not just from Denver but from New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. "She's really doing it," her mother whispered proudly one Christmas while watching Lila ship boxes stacked higher than the tree itself. Daniel's face still lingered sometimes in Lila's mind, but less as a wound, more as fuel. His sneer was her lightning rod, but Aurora Exchange was the storm she created herself. With growth came opportunities that once felt like fantasies. Invitations to speak at local business panels arrived. She declined the first few nervously, afraid she'd be mocked again. But eventually she said yes. The day she stepped onto that stage, heart hammering, she wore no designer gown, no diamonds. Just a clean blazer, thrifted years ago, altered to fit her form. She told a room of aspiring entrepreneurs her story about scavenging waste, about humiliation turned into fire, about persistence that burned brighter than privilege. By the end, the applause was thunderous. Students lined up to shake her hand. One whispered, "You make me believe it's possible." For the first time, Lila realized she wasn't just building a business. She was building belief, proof that impossible beginnings could bloom into brilliance. Aurora Exchange scaled further. She hired a small staff, most from struggling backgrounds like hers, people who knew hunger, who valued second chances. They worked with ferocity, loving the mission almost as much as paychecks. But in the quieter moments, when Lila sat alone at night reviewing finances, she wondered, was this enough? She had pulled her family from poverty, yes. But millionaire? Empire? The mountain still towered above her. That inner voice, sharpened by years, replied, "Keep climbing." Outside, the city glittered. Somewhere in one of those towers, Daniel still lived, surrounded by hollow admiration, cocooned in inherited wealth. Each day she worked, she closed the gap between them, not because she wanted him, but because she wanted the world to see. The girl he rejected was never beneath him. And one day soon she would be standing leagues above. It wasn't easy. It wasn't glamorous. But for the first time she smelled it, faint and promising, the scent of destiny rising with every dollar earned, every scar turned into strength. By the time Lila turned 26, Aurora Exchange had become more than a fledgling spark. It was a small but steady flame. Orders streamed in from out of state, staff had grown from 1 employee to 5, and her annual revenue now touched 6 figures. It was enough to stabilize her mother's health costs, keep Ben, her younger cousin, practically a brother, in school, and pay employees decently. But still, when she looked out across her spreadsheets at night, her chest stirred with restlessness. It isn't enough. That mantra whispered through every quiet moment. Until one day, opportunity arrived not in silk but in clutter. A message pinged into her inbox from someone claiming to be a buyer for a high-end consignment chain. Skeptical at first, Lila read it twice, then 3 times. The buyer explained that their larger chain struggled with refurbishing rare designer items, too much overhead, not enough skilled staff. But they'd noticed Aurora Exchange. Your store takes what others don't want, the buyer wrote, and renders it desirable again. You do more than resell, you resurrect. We want to see what you can do on a larger scale. Attached was an offer, a pilot partnership. Aurora would take batches of discarded designer goods from their warehouses, restore them, and sell them as a specialty revival line. Split profits 50-50. Was risky. Scaling this fast meant capital she didn't quite have. Mara sat chewing her pen as they reviewed the numbers. If you say yes, we'll need more people, more equipment, better logistics. The margins could collapse if you don't execute perfectly. Lila read the offer again, heart pounding. She thought of Daniel's mocking smirk across that networking hall. Pocket change. No, she answered firmly. Margins won't collapse. Because no one works like us. We say yes. Those 2 words altered the trajectory of her life. The first deliveries arrived in a freight truck, piles of torn leather, stained silk, broken zippers. To many it resembled a landfill. To Lila it was treasure. Her team worked tirelessly around the clock, cutting, stitching, steaming, cleaning. She bled fingertips on needles, inhaled chemicals from cleaners until her head spun. 4 weeks, failure loomed, exhaustion threatened collapse, and critics whispered Aurora was overreaching. But then the product line launched. And it exploded. Magazine blogs called it upcycled luxury. Influencers posted glowing reviews. Not just sustainable fashion, this is a movement. Affluent customers, ironically, clamored for the authenticity of resurrected goods. Pieces once tossed aside couldn't stay in stock. Within the launch's first quarter, Aurora Exchange tripled revenues. For the first time, Lila's personal account crossed into a realm she dreamed of as impossible. Multiple 6 figures in profit. The victory sent waves across Denver. Suddenly, Lila James wasn't just a scrappy, ambitious girl who scraped discarded bags. She was the woman making sustainability fashionable. Publications sought interviews. Business schools asked her to lecture. Even mayors wanted her at podiums talking about community business. Her mother wept when the local journal released a spread titled, "From Rags to Riches: How Aurora Exchange Transforms Second Chances into First-Class Fashion." And still Lila worked. She refused to glory in the applause, because empires weren't built overnight. They were built under the weight of long nights and bleeding fingertips. But karma, it seemed, had timing sharper than her own. At one charity auction ironically hosted at the same mansion where she had once been humiliated, her business was invited to showcase. Nervously but with chin high, Lila arrived wearing one of her restored gowns. Simple, elegant, confident. Her booth gleamed beneath chandeliers, customers swarming. And then she heard it. A laugh behind her. A voice she knew too well. Daniel Cole. He was older now, mid-20s, face still handsome but less untouchable. The arrogance lingered, but it masked something thinner, stretched. He was surrounded by familiar faces, yet none of their laughter sounded as secure. He turned and froze. His eyes locked on her brand's glossy banner, Aurora Exchange, Revival. Luxury. Power. Then his gaze landed on her. Lila? His voice cracked faintly with disbelief. Her lips curved in a calm smile. Daniel. He scanned her, eyes sweeping the line of customers waiting to buy her goods, the admiration in strangers' eyes, the wealth gleaming plainly in the way she carried herself. His smirk twitched uncertainly. I mean, this is yours? Yes, she said smoothly. Built it myself. For once, he had no immediate retort. He tried recovering. Well, they say luck strikes sometimes, don't they? Her eyes sparked, steady. Luck is preparation rewarded. He shifted, flustered at her confidence. His friends muttered uneasily, watching the subtle shift in power. The room that had once laughed at her now looked at him like he didn't belong. The humiliation slammed Daniel quietly, invisible but crushing. For the first time he saw the poor girl he'd mocked wasn't beneath him, she was soaring far above. The auction ended with Lila's line raising more money than any other vendor. Applause surrounded her, and when she walked out of that mansion, it wasn't into a storm but a sunrise of her own making. Afterward, Daniel sought her out, chasing. He cornered her near the valet. Lila, listen. Maybe I was too harsh back then. We were kids, right? Immature. I see who you are now and I admire it. He forced a smile. Maybe we could catch dinner sometime? For old time's sake. Lila studied him calmly. Where once she would have trembled, now she carried steel and grace. Daniel, you once said you don't do charity work in dating. Remember? He flinched. That was don't twist it, I didn't mean. You were right, she said softly, walking closer until her voice cut. You don't do charity. And I don't do arrogance. Thank you for reminding me. She walked away, chauffeur door closing behind her as his figure shrank in the glass reflection. For Lila, it wasn't triumph for revenge, it was proof. Proof she had risen without permission, without apologies. That night, she sat in her new office, a sleek high-rise space she had rented with her rising success. She opened her old spiral notebook, yellowed with years, and traced a goal underlined 3 times. Make something of myself. One by one she crossed it off, then added a new line. Empire. Her smile sharpened. Daniel's face no longer haunted her as a wound. Now it was only a footnote in her legend. And she knew this was the halfway point. The world hadn't seen her biggest leap yet. After that charity auction, Lila's name spread further than she expected and faster than she believed possible. What once had been whispers of admiration turned into headlines. Fashion blogs titled her, the Queen of Revival. Sustainability magazines praised Aurora Exchange as the future of eco-luxury. Local television stations asked for interviews about her rags to riches story. Lila hated the cliché, rags to riches. To her, it wasn't about clothes or rags, it was about the evening spent shivering in her tiny studio, desperately learning finance lingo from free courses, eating rice for weeks on end to save even $20 extra. The world saw a glamorous narrative, she remembered the grit. But fame opened doors that once seemed locked. And Lila, now 27, had learned how to walk through them with controlled grace. One particularly pivotal moment came when a venture capitalist named Rowan Hale requested a meeting. He was an older man with sharp white hair and sharper eyes, the kind who had built empires by betting on others' dreams. I've been watching Aurora Exchange, Rowan said as they sat at a polished boardroom table high above the city. You've tapped into a market most ignored, luxury sustainability. That's bigger than fashion. It's a cultural shift. And I think you're sitting on the edge of an empire. Lila met his gaze steady. I didn't start Aurora to build an empire. I started it to survive. But survival only grows when you escalate. Rowan smiled, faintly testing her poise. Then escalate with me. I'll inject the capital to scale you nationwide. Stores. Distribution lines. Designers collaborating under your label. In exchange, my firm takes a percentage and we help blow this brand to the level of Gucci, Prada, Hermes, but with a conscience. It was everything she had dreamed of and everything she feared. Immediate expansion risked losing authenticity, losing the small heartbeat of Aurora that made it different. But Mara, seated at her side, leaned over and whispered out of the corner of her mouth, "This could catapult you, Lila. This is the door." Lila inhaled slowly and gave her answer. "We'll take it. On one condition, Aurora's mission is never compromised. If we scale, it scales with integrity or the deal collapses." Rowan's grin sharpened. "I rather like opponents who negotiate." "Fine. Deal." With that handshake, the trajectory shifted again. The next 3 years were a blur. Stores with the Aurora Exchange emblem opened in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Deals spilled across continents. London Fashion Week spotlighting her, Milan editors salivating over sustainability lines. Social media influencers fought to be seen in Aurora revivals. Celebrities toted her once scraped handbags proudly on red carpets, calling them statements of conscience. The financial payoff mirrored the cultural waves. Annual revenue leapt from 6 figures to 7, then into the small stratosphere of 8. By the time Lila turned 30, she was solidly, undeniably, a millionaire, net worth lined across Forbes' secondary lists under self-made entrepreneurs to watch. At home, things transformed as well. Her mother's health stabilized under the best doctors money could buy. Their tiny apartment became a memory as Lila purchased her mother a modest but sunlit house with a garden, a long-held dream finally realized. Ben thrived in his education, dreaming of becoming a surgeon, thanks to tuition bills paid in advance. But through all her success, Lila carried herself with humility mined from past wounds. She didn't throw wealth like confetti at parties. She didn't buy fleets of cars. She invested, reinvested, mentored. Aurora Exchange doubled as a company and a platform for giving back each quarter. Proceeds funded shelters for low-income families, community workshops teaching financial literacy. When reporters pressed her about her wealth, she said only, "A dollar doesn't prove worth. What you do with it does." Every step of the way, however, Daniel remained a shadow at the edges of her story. His family's old money kept him afloat, but rumors trickled through mutual acquaintances. Failed startups, bad investments, parties lasting longer than deals. Women entered and exited his life quickly. The golden boy of high school was tarnishing under the weight of a world he once thought he owned. And then fate orchestrated their crossroads again. It happened at a corporate networking summit for international entrepreneurs in New York. Lila was a keynote speaker, standing on stage in a sleek, tailored suit, one of her own line's revival pieces. She spoke with confidence about building businesses that turn waste into possibility and give voices to those overlooked. The applause rattled through the grand hall like thunder. Backstage, as she stepped away, a voice froze her mid-breath. "Lila?" She turned. There he was, Daniel Cole. But time had not polished him, it had eroded him. His once flawless tailored aura was rumpled, the gleam in his eyes dulled by disillusionment. He carried himself like a man who had fallen off pedestals but pretended otherwise. He blinked at her in awe. "I can't believe it. You were just a waitress, a thrift girl, and now..." His gaze trailed over the badge clipped to her lapel. Lila James, founder and CEO, Aurora Exchange. A bitter laugh escaped him. "Now they're standing for you." She steadied her breath, her voice calm steel. "Yes, they are." Daniel swallowed. "Lila, his confidence cracked, replaced by desperation. "I messed up. Back then I didn't see you for who you were. I was shallow, arrogant, stupid. And now I see it. You were the real thing all along." Lila studied him long, silence pressing like a test between them. Part of her remembered the rain, the laughter, the word charity. But another part saw the man standing before her, not powerful but hollow, stripped. He stepped closer, almost begging. "Please, give me another chance. I can't stop thinking, what if I had chosen differently?" Her heart beat steady, face serene. "You didn't choose me when I was invisible, Daniel. And I don't need you now that I'm undeniable." His shoulders sagged, devastation flickering across his features. Around them, guests murmured, eyes widening as whispers spread. Daniel Cole, chasing Lila James, rejected. For years, she dreamt of this moment as a fiery revenge speech, a dramatic scene of victory. But standing here in her own polished success, she realized she didn't need dramatics. She had already won. She gave him a small, almost kind smile. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." And with that, she walked away, her heels echoing against marble floors, applause from her earlier keynote still ringing in the massive hall. Daniel stood in silence, watching her vanish into the crowd, finally tasting the weight of rejection he had once so carelessly tossed outward. And Lila James, the poor girl he dismissed, didn't just return a millionaire. She returned untouchable. The New York summit solidified Aurora Exchange's place as more than a boutique sensation. It was now an international brand. After her keynote, offers flooded her inbox, collaborations from European houses that once dismissed her, universities seeking her insights, investors courting her. Lila, back at her hotel suite that night, let herself sit quietly on the balcony, city lights glittering beneath. She sipped tea, her suit jacket folded neatly over a chair. The applause still hummed in her ears, but so did Daniel's voice, hoarse, desperate, tinged with regret. "Give me another chance." The words no longer stung, instead they rang hollow. Years ago, she would have melted at the idea of Daniel noticing her. Years ago, she dreamed of approval, of belonging. Now she realized she didn't need his chance, she had created her own. Mara joined her quietly, holding her own cup. "You okay?" Lila smiled faintly. "Yes. Just closing an old chapter." Mara arched an eyebrow. He looked like he'd swallowed gravel when you walked away. Because he tasted what I tasted once, Lila replied softly. Humiliation. And how did it feel to give it back? Mara teased. Lila sipped her tea and surprised herself with her answer. Not satisfying. Not like I imagined. Because satisfaction didn't come from rejecting him, it came from realizing I didn't need to anymore. I grew beyond it. That night marked a turning point. The narrative of revenge no longer dictated her steps. From then on, every decision Lila made was about growth, legacy, and love, not just business but humanity. Months later, Aurora Exchange opened its flagship European store in Paris. The ribbon-cutting ceremony glistened with flashbulbs as Lila spoke in fluent, rehearsed French, thanking the city for believing in a vision built on second chances. Audiences adored her grace. She returned to Denver weeks later, where her roots grounded her. She didn't want to be another untouchable billionaire, locked in a glass cage. She attended local school workshops, mentoring young women with ambitions bigger than their wallets. She funded small community startups, reminding them, "My empire began with one torn handbag and a stubborn promise. Yours can begin today." The more success she won, the more she invested in others. For all her millions, she dressed modestly, lived in an elegant but not gaudy apartment, and spent time with her mother, who still hummed off-key in the mornings as she brewed better coffee than the burnt kind Lila remembered. Meanwhile, Daniel spiraled further. His investments failed, his charm soured into desperation, and the once invincible Cole legacy dwindled. Papers occasionally mentioned him. Cole Sion sells stake to cover losses. Each headline reminded Lila of her vow that wealth should never be squandered or abused. It was to be wielded like a tool, not flaunted like armor. One evening at a Denver gala where Aurora Exchange was being honored for philanthropy, Daniel appeared again. He looked thinner, paler, suit ill-fitting. The whispers around the hall stung louder. That's Daniel Cole? Didn't his family lose their oil fortune? He approached Lila cautiously, humility replacing bravado. Lila, I just wanted to say I admire who you've become. I was cruel to you once, and it ended up defining both of us, didn't it? Lila studied him quietly. His words weren't manipulative this time, they were heavy, honest. She answered gently, "It defined me because I let it fuel me. But it won't define me anymore. And it shouldn't define you. Your choices are yours. They always have been." Daniel's eyes watered faintly, but he nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." She offered a small smile. "Apology accepted. Now take that chance and build something of your own. Stop surviving on your father's ghosts." He blinked in shock, then slowly nodded again, walking away. For the first time, Lila didn't see him as tormentor or rival. He was simply a man learning his own hard lessons. That night, Mara teased her endlessly. "Closure looks good on you." But it wasn't closure that mattered. It was clarity. Daniel no longer occupied her climb. Lila's story was no longer about proving him wrong, it was about proving her own worth right. Still, amid her rising empire, one truth nagged her endlessly. She had sacrificed love for ambition. She didn't regret it, her heart needed to heal, her focus had needed to be absolute, but now, as millions flowed and impact widened, she wondered if she was ready. One spring afternoon, during a workshop she sponsored at a local university, she met Nathan. He was a quiet professor, passionate about sustainability research. He spoke little but with conviction, eyes glowing when he discussed community farming and renewable tech. Unlike Daniel, Nathan never looked at her for what she could give, he looked at her for who she was. Their conversations bled into dinners, their dinners into laughter, their laughter into trust. Slowly, Lila let herself imagine something she once deemed impossible. A love that didn't diminish her, but strengthened her. When Mara noticed, she smirked. "Finally, someone who deserves your time." In Nathan's eyes, Lila saw reflections not of poverty, not of humiliation, not of Daniel, but of futures built with warmth, with belief, with equal footing. Years after the mansion storm, Lila realized, revenge was never the real empire. Love was. And though she still wore tailored suits and signed deals worth millions, though she still commanded stages, the truest victory was the ability to stand by someone and know her worth was never conditional. By the time Lila turned 31, Aurora Exchange wasn't just a business, it was a movement. Fashion editors praised her ability to marry conscience with couture. Financial circles called her one of the most innovative entrepreneurs of her generation. Philanthropists admired her donations to sustainable farming, affordable housing, and women-owned startups. When Forbes published its annual Self-Made Under 40 list, her photo graced the cover. In the image, she sat calmly at the head of her Denver office's sleek conference table, confidence in her eyes rather than jewels. The caption beneath, "From Rejection to Riches, How Lila James Built the Future of Fashion." She laughed when she saw the copy. To her, success was far more complicated than a neat headline. But she understood the appeal. It was a narrative the public adored. Girl mocked for her poverty, rising higher than her tormentors ever dreamt. At speaking events, she no longer stammered nervously. She commanded auditoriums. She told rooms of young entrepreneurs that success wasn't linear, that rejection wasn't fatal, and that the people who laugh at you today will often watch from below tomorrow, wondering why they're not laughing anymore. Privately, she never mentioned Daniel by name. She didn't need to. Yet whispers about him circulated anyway. His father's fortune had withered under mismanagement. Daniel, once heir to comfort, was forced to sell cars, apartments, pieces of land. Tabloids that once fawned over him now wrote brutal pieces. Former golden boy Cole struggles to find footing. Parties over, debts remain. One Sunday morning, Mara walked into Lila's office waving a magazine. "You need to see this." It was a glossy yet merciless profile of Daniel shot in a dim apartment instead of a mansion. He sat hunched on a threadbare couch, still handsome but weary-eyed. The article quoted him admitting past arrogance. Mara read aloud. "I lost everything because I thought money was guaranteed," he said. "I mocked people who worked for theirs instead of inheriting it. Now, the one I ridiculed most is who I admire most." Lila closed the magazine softly. "Admiration without evolution is just nostalgia," she murmured. But she couldn't deny the poetic symmetry. He had once laughed at her cracked shoes, and now, when the world looked at him, all they saw was broken pride. That week, Lila traveled to Singapore to debut Aurora's Asia flagship boutique. The grand opening drew diplomats, celebrities, sustainability activists. Lights, music, ribbon-cutting, the press absorbed every detail. Cameras flashed relentlessly when she declared, "We don't create products. We create futures. And every future deserves a second chance." The words trended globally, hashtags swirling, young designers citing her in their mission statements. At her hotel afterward, she sat with Nathan, their relationship now steady, comfortable. He poured her tea, smiling quietly. "You've become an icon," he teased lightly. "Does it ever feel surreal?" "Always," she admitted. "I look at the crowd sometimes and think of the girl in second-hand shoes who was told she didn't belong." "And now the world belongs to you," Nathan said warmly. She shook her head. "No. The world doesn't belong to anyone. You just choose whether you build it or waste it." Her humility only deepened public affection. She turned Aurora into more than fashion. Portions of revenue-funded community startups. She launched what she called the Revival Fund, giving grants to marginalized entrepreneurs with promising ideas. Television networks captured tearful stories of families lifted by her help. And yet, even as her legacy grew radiant, karma kept delivering reminders. One autumn evening, Lila returned to Denver for a charity gala. Guests gathered under crystal chandeliers, toasting Aurora's recent billion-dollar valuation. A valet stumbled nervously into her, whispering shyly, "Miss James? Mr. Cole is outside asking if he can see you." Her chest stilled. This would be their third encounter. She followed the valet, stepping into the cool night air. There, leaning against a rusted sedan, stood Daniel. His suit no longer fit, his tie hung loosely. Recognition flickered in his tired eyes. "Lila," he began softly, desperation threading his tone. "Congratulations. Forbes cover, stores worldwide, you've made it." "I just wanted to," he swallowed hard, "to thank you for showing me who I used to be. Arrogant, blind. If I hadn't treated you the way I did, maybe I'd still hold all that wealth. But maybe I deserve to lose it." She studied him quietly. The boy who once paraded his fortune now looked like a man clinging to threads. But pity didn't surface. Instead, clarity did. "You didn't lose wealth because of me, Daniel," she said firmly. "You lost it because you tied your identity to it. I was humiliated once because of you. But humiliation taught me hunger, and hunger built me an empire. You could build your own if you chose hunger over excuses. His lips trembled. For a moment he seemed ready to argue, but then something broke. He looked away ashamed. You're right. Lila touched his shoulder lightly. Then prove me right. Don't try to reclaim Golden Boy. Build something real instead. With that, she re-entered the gala, the music swelling as she joined Nathan and Mara at their table. Daniel stood alone in the night, staring at the building where applause vibrated for the woman he once mocked. Inside, Nathan leaned close, whispering, "You handled that kindly." "Kindness costs less than cruelty," Lila replied softly. "And it leaves better interest." The gala erupted when an auction revealed Aurora Exchange funding a new Denver youth initiative. Lila watched parents cry as pledges rolled in. Beside her, her mother held her hand proudly. "She's not poor Lila anymore," her mother whispered tearfully. "She's proof." And proof had never felt sweeter. 3 years after Aurora Exchange's meteoric rise onto the global stage, Lila James stood on a balcony in Milan overlooking a sea of spotlights. It was Aurora's first European Fashion Week as headliner, and the streets swarmed with fans chanting her company's name like it was a brand and a movement all at once. The runway below had ended only an hour earlier, but the energy lingered. Models had walked in her signature revival gowns crafted from discarded silks and reimagined leather. Faces splashed across magazines that called her the most important figure in sustainable fashion today. Lila breathed in the cool Italian night air, Nathan's arm warm around her waist. "Do you ever stop?" he teased, resting his chin against her shoulder. She laughed lightly. "I don't think empires ever sleep." But it wasn't just empires anymore, it was her purpose. She had crossed into territory Daniel Cole mocked as impossible. Once he said she didn't belong in the room. Now she owned the building, the stage, and the spotlight that room had prayed for. Only weeks earlier, Forbes published another article not just on her millionaire status but on Aurora Exchange being valued at $1 billion. Billion 10 figures. Lila James, once the girl with cracked shoes and whispered shame, was now a billionaire. A title she hadn't dared scrawl into that first spiral notebook back in her bedroom. But she didn't let the number sway her heart. She kept offices modest compared to competitors, directed profits into her revival fund, and ensured Aurora-sponsored clinics, community programs, scholarships. She didn't want to be remembered as a rich woman, she wanted to be remembered as a woman who turned rejection into a revolution. Meanwhile, Daniel Cole's decline stretched further. He had been seen leaving courtrooms, his name tied to lawsuits over unpaid debts. Tabloids now pitted him instead of praising him with headlines like, "From heiress parties to pawn shops, the fall of Daniel Cole." Even his old friends from that glittering circle had drifted. The same crowd that once laughed at Lila's humiliation now whispered behind Daniel's back. Once he had mocked her thrift shoes. Now he wore suits out of season, ill-fitting, no longer tailored to perfection. The comparison became a favorite topic online, side-by-side photos of what he once was against what she had become. Comment sections buzzed, "Karma never misses." But Lila never joined in those laughs. She didn't repost, didn't comment. She had nothing to gain by watching Daniel collapse further. She only focused forward. His downfall was the echo of his past choices. Her future was built on hers. Back in Denver, she launched Aurora Academy, an initiative teaching young underprivileged entrepreneurs about business fundamentals, funding them, mentoring them. She spoke at the opening ceremony. "I was told once that my place was beneath others. I was taught that lack of money equaled lack of worth. Today I stand here because I refuse to listen. Every dreamer in this room, you don't need permission to belong. You create your own seat at the table. And if no table exists," she smiled, "build one." Children wept with their parents. Teenagers thundered applause. Headlines covered it with fervor. Lila James extends her reach beyond fashion, builds future leaders through Aurora Academy. Her emails exploded with thank yous. Students who once thought business was unattainable now believed it possible. Teachers brought her notebooks filled with scribbled plans from youth inspired by her tale. Still, sometimes at night Lila reflected with Nathan, her head resting on his chest. "It's strange," she whispered, "how when I was younger all I wanted was to prove Daniel wrong. Now proving him wrong feels so small compared to this." Nathan smiled, stroking her hair. That's because you've grown into proving yourself right. That's what matters. Yet fate wasn't satisfied. Poetic justice wasn't done. One winter evening she attended another Denver charity fundraiser. This time Aurora Exchange was lead sponsor. The ballroom buzzed with admiration for her, donors circling, reporters scribbling. And in the corner, out of place, stood Daniel. He looked worn, features hard-creased by regret, his posture sagging. He didn't approach her this time. He didn't dare. But his eyes followed her every move, haunted, hungry for the version of himself that once commanded such attention. Lila noticed him but didn't react. To her, he was a ghost, a man of the past. Not enemy, not rival, not object of revenge. Just a memory still standing upright. During her speech that night, she spoke words that seemed aimed at every table, but privately they hit Daniel hardest. Do not dismiss someone because of where they are. Time has a way of turning witnesses into believers, and believers into builders. And those you once laughed at may be the ones building tomorrow. The applause that followed thundered through the chandeliers. Daniel left before the end, hands trembling as he pulled his cheap coat tighter. The poor girl once laughed at was now Denver's crown jewel, global icon, billionaire philanthropist. And he was nothing but a faded name. The world had tilted. The next day, local bloggers wrote about his presence. Commenters online tore him apart, contrasting his decline with her triumph. Yet Lila moved on without thought. Daniel's life didn't matter to hers anymore. His choices wrote his ending. Hers was still writing a legacy. By late spring, Aurora Exchange launched a collaboration with international designers, rewriting global supply chains into sustainable, fair networks. Entire communities abroad prospered from her vision. When foreign leaders shook her hand and thanked her for rescuing workers from predatory companies, she thought of that night long ago in the rain, her, leaving a mansion laughed at, clutching her soaked bag. It seemed centuries had passed since then. Do you ever think about him? Mara once asked late during a strategy session. Lila blinked. Daniel? Yes. Does he ever still matter? Lila shook her head softly. He mattered because of what he represented. He was everything I wasn't. Wealth, arrogance, belonging. And when he rejected me, he forced me to see my choices. But now, he doesn't matter at all. I don't fight him anymore. I only build me. Mara grinned. That's why you won. Because you stopped chasing shadows and chased yourself instead. The thought lingered warmly. Lila realized that while karmic justice was satisfying, true justice was outgrowing the prison revenge builds. She'd outgrown Daniel. She'd outgrown the need for validation. And the world watching her in awe saw not a millionaire scorned but a leader who resurrected more than handbags. She resurrected hope. Winter in Denver came with sharp winds and skies the color of steel. One icy evening, Lila sat in her office on the top floor of Aurora's headquarters, gazing out at snowflakes melting against the glass. She had just finalized Aurora's next expansion plan, collaborations with eco-tech firms that would revolutionize not just fashion, but entire industries of waste reduction. Behind her, Nathan leaned casually against a cabinet, arms folded, watching her with that gentle amusement she'd grown to love. You've been staring out that window for 10 minutes, he teased. She turned, smiling faintly. I was thinking about how far it feels from the girl who once didn't dare touch glass because she was afraid to leave fingerprints. Before Nathan could answer, Mara entered, coat still dusted with snow. Her expression was cautious. There's someone downstairs asking to see you. Who? Lila asked. Mara hesitated. Daniel Cole. Silence thickened the room. Nathan frowned, Mara's lips pursed. Lila sat still for a moment, the snow outside swirling like old ghosts. Then she nodded. Bring him up. Minutes later, Daniel entered, hat in his hands, shoulders hunched. He looked smaller than ever, age hollowing the arrogance from his face. His eyes dropped to the expensive flooring as if he no longer believed he belonged anywhere clean. Lila, he began, voice raspy. Lila studied him calmly. Her tailored suit, her poised stance, the empire pulsing through the hallways behind her, everything contrasted against his frayed coat and weary face. But instead of pride or satisfaction, what she felt first was stillness. What do you want, Daniel? She asked evenly. He struggled to find words. I know I've lost everything. Investments, friends. The name Cole doesn't open doors anymore. I can't even find steady work. The mansion is gone. All the people who once swarmed around me gone too. He coughed lightly, then added, "You were right. Fortune without effort is nothing but sand. I mocked you. I laughed at you. And now," his voice cracked, "now I can barely look at myself." For a fleeting moment, she saw the boy who dismissed her in soaked shoes, yes, but also the boy who had been cursed with believing wealth would last forever. She saw regret carving him hollow. "You didn't come here to remind me of what I already survived," she said quietly. "So why are you here?" His gaze lifted, hollow but desperate. "Because I don't know where else to go. I thought, maybe, you could forgive me. Maybe you could help me." The plea hung in the air, raw and trembling. Nathan, standing protectively at Lila's side, stiffened. Mara's brows pinched, ready to throw Daniel out. But Lila only breathed in deeply, eyes never leaving him. "Forgive you?" she repeated softly. "I forgave you long ago. Not for your sake, never for your sake. For mine. The moment I rose beyond you, forgiveness was the lock I turned so I could close that door." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "As for help," she added, chin lifting, "you don't need my charity. What you need is work. Humility. Hunger. The very things you once mocked. I can't give you those. Only you can." His lips trembled. "So, nothing then?" Lila considered. Slowly, she reached into her desk drawer and pulled free one of Aurora Academy's flyers, the program she'd built for disadvantaged entrepreneurs. She slid it across the desk toward him. "You want to rebuild? Start here. Enroll anonymously if you must. No one will care about your last name there. They'll only care about your effort. If you can't stomach that, then you'll never rise again." Daniel picked up the flyer with shaking hands, staring at it. He laughed bitterly through tears. The irony. Me, once the boy who mocked you, now begging to be one of your students. Lila's gaze was steady. Irony is life's way of reminding us fairness exists. He exhaled, tears blurring his eyes as he stood. "I'm sorry, Lila. Not just for then. But for now, for wasting so much time." "Then stop wasting the time you still have," she said firmly. Nathan stepped forward, opening the door. Daniel paused at the threshold, looking back at her one last time with heavy eyes. Then he left, footsteps fading into the quiet hall. Silence lingered after. Mara exhaled dramatically. "You're a better person than I am. I would have had him escorted out at the lobby." Lila smiled faintly. "And that wouldn't have helped. Daniel doesn't need to be punished any more than he's already punished himself. He doesn't need my empire either. He needs to rebuild his own dignity. And the only person who can hand him that is him." Nathan wrapped an arm around her shoulders thoughtfully. "You always choose the harder path, mercy instead of cruelty. Because I know what cruelty feels like," Lila whispered. "And I refuse to pass it on." That night, when she returned home, she opened her original spiral notebook again. So many goals were scribbled there, many crossed out. Pay off debts crossed. Start business done. Reach millionaire status done. Be remembered still circled, underlined. She smiled to herself. She realized that Daniel's downfall wasn't her real victory. Her victory was that she no longer needed him as a measuring stick. Her horizon was bigger than one man's failure. Still, the symmetry lingered in her mind. She had once been a poor girl begging for acknowledgement. Now Daniel had become the one begging not for romance, not for approval, but for belief in himself. Life truly had revolved full circle. And unlike the stormy night years ago, this time Lila left the conversation dry-eyed, rooted not in rain but in sunlight of her choosing. Nathan joined her at the table, closing the notebook gently. "So what's the next goal?" he asked with a smile. She looked at him, warmth in her eyes. "Legacy. Not just an empire that makes money, an empire that outlives me. That helps the girl who gets laughed at tomorrow know she'll have the last word someday." Nathan kissed her temple softly. "Now that sounds like a Lila James plan." Her eyes flickered to the skyline, glowing against the snow. Daniel was already fading into memory. And she understood. Once and for all, she wasn't the poor girl he rejected anymore. She wasn't even just the millionaire he envied. She was the mentor, the builder, the woman who had forged herself into unshakable steel and now passed that fire on. Spring arrived in Denver with blossoms weaving color back into the streets. Aurora Exchange's headquarters gleamed with banners for its 10th anniversary. 10 years since Lila James, armed only with a thrift store notebook and stubborn fire, began turning scraps into symbols of revival. She stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in her office, adjusting the navy dress she'd chosen for the evening gala marking this milestone. Cameras would swarm, speeches would echo, champagne would flow not to celebrate handbags, but to celebrate what Aurora had become. A billion-dollar brand funding education, shelters, sustainable farms, startups for those ignored. Nathan entered quietly, carrying a bouquet of simple wildflowers. Unlike the roses courted by tabloids, these flowers were modest, unpretentious, alive with color. He handed them to her with his familiar smile. "You're about to walk into a room full of governors, investors, celebrities, and journalists," he teased. "But I still think you look best just like this." She laughed softly, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "And I still think you're the only man who's ever really seen me." Before they left, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out the same battered notebook that had followed her across every chapter. She flipped to the first page where a teenage scrawl once read, "Make something of myself." That line was now crossed out, bold and proud. The page below listed her final scribble, "Legacy." She closed it with a firm hand. Ready? The gala hall shimmered beneath chandeliers. Guests filled every table, applause thundered as hosts introduced her. Lila ascended the stage with calm grace. Faces turned politicians, journalists, fashion leaders, and hundreds of community members she'd impacted. She steadied her microphone and smiled. 10 years ago, I was told I didn't belong. That I was less. That ambition in worn shoes was laughable. But rain fueled me more than laughter drowned me. And today, I stand here not to prove anyone wrong but to prove every overlooked dream right. The crowd erupted. Some audience members dabbed tears, others rose in standing ovations. Cameras captured it all, illuminating her like fire against crystal. Her words continued. Aurora Exchange was never just about fashion. It was about dignity. About revival. About helping people believe that nothing, not poverty, not rejection, not a cruel word defines your worth. We turned scraps into beauty, and I stand here to say, you can turn scars into strength and doubts into destinies. The applause was loud enough to shake glasses on tables. Nathan, beaming, clapped the hardest. Then, as the ceremony closed, journalists swarmed her. Questions about expansion, about wealth, about Forbes' recent claim that she was now one of the wealthiest under 40 self-made women in the world. She answered patiently, kindly, but never let wealth be the headline. Your net worth is historic, one reporter pressed. My worth, she corrected gently, was historic long before numbers proved it. Everyone's is. Later that night, as the crowd dispersed and laughter echoed under dazzling lights, her mother hugged her tightly. You've built more than I ever dreamed for you, my girl. Mama, Lila whispered, smiling through tears, I built it for us, for everyone who thought we didn't matter. Outside the ballroom, snow began to fall softly, though it was spring, the sort of poetic snow that seemed almost scripted. She stepped onto the terrace, watching flakes dissolve against the city's glow. Nathan joined her, sliding a small velvet box into her hand. I want to share whatever comes next, he said quietly. He opened it. Inside shone a ring, elegant but modest. No gaudy jewels, just clarity and strength like them. Her laugh trembled with joy. You waited until my empire was secure before asking? He shook his head. I waited until you believed you didn't need an empire for someone to love you. Tears brimmed. This wasn't pity. This wasn't validation from arrogance. This was pure partnership. She whispered yes before he even finished sliding the ring onto her finger. When they returned inside, cameras caught only a glimpse of the sparkle, yet even if the world never saw, she knew, it was the brightest crown she had ever worn. And though whispers of Daniel occasionally reached her ears that he'd enrolled in a trade program, that he was slowly rebuilding, she no longer flinched. She wished him well, quietly, hoping he found the humility he once lacked. He was no villain in her life anymore, only a lesson written in fading ink. Months later, when Aurora Exchange launched the Aurora Foundation dedicated to resurrecting not goods but lives, her speech closed the circle once and for all. She stood before donors, students, children, mothers from shelters and said, I was once the poor girl rejected. Today I am the woman returned a millionaire. But wealth is not what defines us. What defines us is what we do with it. And so, with this foundation, I want to remind the world, to revive is not just to fix material, it is to heal. And every person deserves to heal. The roar of the crowd was deafening, not for her, not for Aurora, but for the dream she ignited in others. That night, beside Nathan, rings shining faintly in the glow of the city, Lila opened her notebook one final time. She crossed out legacy. Beneath it she wrote a single new word: home. Because after years of storms and laughter and scars and proving, she had found what Daniel's rejection could never erase, what wealth could never truly buy: peace. A life filled not just with victory but with belonging. And when she closed the notebook at last, she knew the story that had once begun in humiliation had ended in triumph, not against Daniel, not for revenge, but for herself, her family, and a future built on unshakable love. The poor girl had been rejected. The millionaire had returned. And now the woman had arrived home.